Imagine a day when goodwill and harsh reality collide, when a single brave act of kindness starts a domino effect, response that changes people's lives. Imagine a committed physician who puts everything on the line to rescue a stray puppy only to encounter unanticipated repercussions from her own place of employment. And just when it looks like everything is lost, a miracle happens in only a few minutes. Join us while we work things out. An emotional journey that will uplift your soul and warm your heart. Rebecca Lawson, a physician at Riverdale Medical Center, was renowned for her kind disposition and steadfast commitment to her patients as she rushed through the hospital's crowded hallways. A slight moan was heard. She was stopped in her tracks by a sound that was both kind and frantic. Trax, a shabby stray, was hidden behind a set of emergency doors. Rebecca picked up the TR without hesitation as the dog shivered in the cold. Ling animals' eyes convey a combination of love and resolve in that moment when she made a decision that would alter the puppy's destiny and cause things she could never have. Inside the hospital, rumors of the doctor's sudden act of kindness quickly circulated among the personnel. However, Rebecca's sympathetic outlook after holding the puppy in the sterile hallways was not shared by everyone. She was called in her boss's office, where she witnessed a startling and painful event when her boss firmly told her that she was being fired with effect because her unsuitable priorities had cost the hospital a lot of money. The word hit Rebecca like icy rain right away, leaving her confused and concerned that preserving a helpless life could be a reason for termination in a setting where every second. The hospital's environment became tense with surprise and murmurs as the shock of the firing started to set in. I'll sense that something out of the ordinary was happening, a mix of unfiltered emotion and patience, unanticipated defeat, and a glimmer of hope. Then 30 minutes later as Rebecca was crying as she stood outside the hospital because something amazing had happened and there was a ruckus. A group of prominent local benefactors and animal welfare advocates gathered at the hospital entrance after hearing of her selfless gesture came with a promise that would not only validate her behavior, but also change the course of the stray puppy's life and the lives of several others in need. This is the tale of a doctor who bravely, kindness, the agonizing price of doing the right thing, and the amazing outcome that demonstrated that compassion can. Dr. Rebecca Lawson has always taken pleasure in her ability to transform lives in the most unexpected ways. Emphasis on prioritizing her patients at Riverdale Medical Center, and occasionally even those in need, where Rebecca's compassion endured in the break room, where the hum of hurried activity was as consistent as the morning coffee ritual. Was well known to both patients and coworkers that brisk autumn morning, but she was bound to be put to the test in ways that, as she made her way through the crowded hallways between consultations and emergency rooms earlier in the day, she never would have. From a dim corner, Rebecca heard a faint, desperate whimper. With little room for uncertainty, she followed her instincts and found a tiny little place close to the hospital's emergency exit. The unkempt stray puppy's big, soulful eyes and shivering body in the cold. Without hesitation, matted fur depicted a scene of abandonment and mistreatment. In that silent, life-affirming moment, Rebecca chose to save this creature and swept it into her arms. Innocent life in spite of the dangers of breaking her strict routine back. As Rebecca covered the dog in a spare blanket from her pack and gently dried it in the little on-call room, her emotions, the gentle whimpers of the animals, filled with both hope and grief, reflected the silent cries of those in need in various ways that the hospital's antiseptic hallways frequently failed to convey in her thoughts. Each and every preserved life, whether it be human or animal, was evidence that kindness exceeded laws and regulations, but destiny had other ideas. Word of her deed of generosity quickly spread throughout Riverdale Medical Center like wildfire, as many of her coworkers grinned encouragingly and whispered words of support to Rebecca's superior doctor. Martin Coldwell had a completely different perspective on the situation. He believed that rigorous protocol and the effective. At 10:15 a.m., resource use was at its peak, just 30 minutes after Rebecca's. She was called to Dr. Caldwell's Oster office for rescue. The space was chilly and austere, in sharp contrast to the warmth that had surrounded her in the waiting room for a moment. When delivering the news, Dr. Caldwell's tone was curt and displeased. Despite your good intentions, Lawson, your actions today have interrupted our operations. We cannot let our personal interests get in the way of our obligations to our patients. Regret to notify you that you will be removed from your post effective immediately. His remarks struck like a gavel in an empty courtroom, leaving Rebecca speechless and devastated by the deed she thought best exemplified her dedication to healing was now being exploited against her. The news of her termination spread. While some co-workers shook their heads and clung, others muttered words of sorrow around the hospital hallways. To the idea that laws should be obeyed regardless of how severe the penalties, Rebecca with the stray. She left the building in the cold, holding the puppy in her arms. The puppy sensed her sadness and nuzzled closer to its little body, making the autumn air feel even harsher as tears clouded her vision. Providing wordless consolation as she stood there feeling abandoned and deceived by a company to which she had dedicated years of her life. Within half an hour, a startling metamorphosis started to take place. After she left, a sleek black sedan arrived at the hospital's gate, and a few locals got out. When renowned animal welfare advocates and philanthropists learned of her altruistic act, their eyes glowed with. Miss Charlotte Green, a revered leader of the group, led them with tenacity and admiration as they approached Rebecca. Lawson, a community leader renowned for her steadfast dedication to social problems, started off cheerfully, as we have heard, regarding what you did today, and we think that your kindness, along with her many other qualities, is precisely what our town needs. Others, each with commitments and donations, as proof of their support. When proposals for a new community and initiative came out, suggesting a collaboration to establish a specific fund, funding local organizations to assist, rehabilitate, and rehome these vulnerable animals, as well as for the care of stray animals. Their sincere and passionate comments changed the. Rebecca listened incredulously as they described a vision that transformed the bitter taste of rejection into a spark of possibility. Not only affirmed her behavior, but also pledged to increase it. Your commitment. We want to make sure that no stray animal goes unrecognized after saving a life today. Mrs. Green stated that we are ready to provide funding for a brand new project called Lawson Animal Care. If you're willing to lead the project, it's in your name. The offer was surprising and at that very moment, when the warmth of human togetherness blended with the coolness of the autumn wind, Rebecca started to see hope. The hospital that had previously chastised her for showing empathy was now unintentionally. Her departure, which had previously been a source of despair, had become the catalyst for something much bigger. Community initiative focused on compassion as the team talked about the practicalities of introducing the new. With the help of the stray puppy, Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. The seeds of a remarkable metamorphosis were being sown, resting against her side as a reminder of the life she had spared. Even though the day had taken a sad and unexpected turn, it was now evident that occasionally the most remarkable results come from having the guts to pursue one's passion with a fresh sense of purpose, according to Dr. Rebecca Lawson, ready to enter a future where her empathy would not only be acknowledged but also spur significant change in her neighborhood. Following the unplanned meeting with the philanthropists outside the Riverdale Medical Center physician, Rebecca Lawson was at a turning point in her life. The pain of being fired was still raw, but the flood of she became fiercely determined after receiving community support, and the stray puppy became a live representation of herself. With compassion securely in her arms, Rebecca made the decision to take a risk and agreed to take the lead on a new project that Charlotte Green and her group have suggested in the days that followed Rebecca's world, which quickly changed from the clean hallways. Despite stringent regulations of her previous job, she now had to deal with a frenzy of meetings, planning sessions, and passionate discussions with community officials, local animal welfare advocates, and even former co-workers who had visited. Despite the merit of her acts, not everyone in the community was thrilled with this new direction. Some doubtful voices contended that politicizing a private act of kindness into a public endeavor was a risk. Compassion, Some local entrepreneurs were concerned that the new loss and animal care project would take money away from. These disputes frequently erupted into contentious discussions during public forums testing other ethical community services. Rebecca's determination and her capacity to bring disparate points of view together During a town hall meeting in a small community center, Rebecca addressed a wide range of supporters and critics. The atmosphere was tense as they asked her questions on how she would make sure this project was handled appropriately. And in light of the hospital's policies, was your termination merely an excuse to hide a more serious issue? Rebecca listened carefully, her eyes displaying empathy and determination. I recognize your worries, she said coolly, but the most important thing is that we acknowledge the importance of empathy and collaborate to create a system that provides for those without. In the meanwhile, Miss Charlotte Green and her group working hard behind the scenes. They contacted nearby companies to obtain funds and resources for the project, coordinated fundraising events, and even succeeded in obtaining the assistance of well-known media figures. Started to pay off as more community members volunteered their time and donations increased gradually. But as the initiative gained traction, unforeseen difficulties surfaced, and a council member who is well known for his unwavering support of conventional methods publicly denounced the initiative, claiming it would result in poor administration and deplete funds from well-established charities. Public condemnations attracted the attention of local news organizations and sparked a flurry of discussions on social media. Rebecca balanced bringing the loss and animal care project back into the public eye at the center of these activities. Late evenings saw her poring over the project's organizing duties while still dealing with the loss of her employment, caring for the small stray who had become her while negotiating bids and working with animal shelters. In one moving occasion, she was a silent motivator while passing by a nearby shelter. Rebecca, accompanied by Miss Green and a group of committed volunteers, took a moment to admiring a line of recently rescued puppies, each of whose lives are important. She said in a tremulous voice, "Emotion, I want to make sure that every lost soul has the opportunity to find a home and love." Yet, at one project planning session, not every contact was positive. Rebecca was accosted by a Riverdale Medical Center co-worker who asked, "How could you risk everything for a stray puppy?" The comment struck a deep chord, and for a moment, his eyes flashed with displeasure. "Your actions cost you your career." Rebecca took a calming breath and responded, "I did what I believed," even though doubt briefly clouded her resolve. Was correct that sometimes listening to your heart means being alone yourself, but it also brings joy. The manner in which her straightforward remarks struck a chord with many people in the room, secretly whispering about unsolved problems while progressively converting skeptics into wary advocates. As her history started to come to light, Rebecca got an anonymous letter saying that her deed of generosity was not the letter included examples from her early days as a resident, and was the first time she had advocated for the voiceless. Tales of little miracles made possible by her constant compassion, even when the letter could have been addressed. Instead of letting it embarrass or devalue her, Rebecca decided to use it as a reminder of her actual purpose. She accepted these memories and used them to strengthen her resolve to bring about long-lasting change as the loss in animal care. As the project progressed, alliances were established with neighborhood veterinary clinics, community centers, and even educational institutions. The purpose of educational programs was to instill in kids a sense of empathy and responsibility for all living things. Creatures, each encounter and minor triumph reaffirmed the notion that occasionally a simple act of kindness can ripples that change a community as a whole, not just one person's life, but in the midst of. There were evenings when Rebecca would sit by herself, and the sting of her expulsion persisted despite her increasing success. As the stray dog curled up next to her, she would question whether she had made the correct decision, but she would also remember the assistance of Ms. Green, the sincere gratitude of animal rescue families, and the smile of, when a child learns to take care of another living being, all hesitation will eventually go, and the disputes and the encounters that characterized these turbulent weeks weren't barriers. Rather, they were stepping stones that made Rebecca confront her weaknesses, put her beliefs to the test, and come out stronger and more determined than before too. With every obstacle, the Lost and Animal Care Project expanded beyond its initial status as a community project, but as a sign of hope and evidence that good deeds, despite their occasional cost, always lead the path. Because something genuinely remarkable surfaced, just as the immediate shock of her dismissal subsided, that would contradict Rebecca's beliefs about Riverdale Medical Center, and even her own previous one. In a little, peaceful area of the hospital parking garage on a wet afternoon, she was organizing her personal items. Between her locker and a crate of medical supplies, Rebecca saw an envelope. The envelope was branded within a solitary handwritten message bearing an official seal she knew from her early hospital days was for the one who is fascinated by her and whose heart sees clearly even when the world is blind. Rebecca cautiously opened the letter, her feelings still raw, and discovered a faded snapshot of herself as a child standing proudly next to a stray dog and a number of documents. A secret file in the docs showed a puppy that was strikingly similar to the one she had saved that day. The hospital had concealed for years that Rebecca had participated in a covert pilot program while she was a resident, program that prioritized compassionate care and community outreach, intended to include non-traditional techniques into the hospital's strict procedures with the express purpose of saving resides both inside and outside the boundaries of the organization. The file named Project Compassion described a number of situations where young physicians, Rebecca in particular, had shown incredible compassion that went against accepted norms in one. Lawson, a young physician, received praise for stepping in during crisis, involving a stray cat at a nearby shelter, an incident that had launched her into a lifetime of advocacy. Additionally, the dossier had a somber undertone since it disclosed that the hospital had abruptly ended the trial study. The administration was under pressure from powerful board members who preferred a rigorous, data-driven strategy over humanistic principles. While Rebecca perused the papers, her thoughts racing both an accusation and a vindication, revelation confirmed that her instinct to save the stray puppy was in keeping with the compassionate care ethos she had previously promoted, but it also implicated her old employer, Dr. Martin Coldwell's methodical attempt to stifle creative, compassionate methods. The documentation claims that Caldwell played a significant role in the decision to close Project Compassion, which was made on paper was defended as an attempt to save expenses and streamline operations in fact, but it seemed that his actions were motivated by a need to preserve the status quo, which valued efficiency over human compassion's messy, unpredictable nature. Rebecca's hands shook as she read a particularly damning memo that was written years before she was fired included directives from higher-ups to stop any extracurricular charitable activities that take away from departmental performance measures. The message continued by cautioning that any departure from rigorous protocol would result in disciplinary measures, such as dismissal, in sharp contrast to the kind and compassionate treatment that has previously characterized the hospitals. Informal motto. The twist struck Rebecca like a tsunami. The reason she had been fired that morning, the allegation that her priorities were out of line, suddenly appeared to be a part of a far bigger conspiracy. Her termination was a planned action to silence those involved, not a single instance of bureaucratic brutality. Having ventured to challenge a strict system, the records indicated that a number of other kind physicians had encountered comparable, for the goal of maintaining an appearance of efficiency at any costs. Their careers were derailed in the middle of the stray puppy Rebecca had been tenderly and urgently caring for appeared to represent more than this emotional turmoil. The small animal, which had previously only been a rescued animal, now acquired a new meaning as a living reminder of a heritage that had been purposefully repressed. As Rebecca held the puppy close, realizing that what she had done today was not just she was continuing her life's work, but she was also rebelling against a system that had long disregarded empathy. Rebecca made the decision to bring the documents to court in order to pursue justice and recover the lost legacy of Project Compassion. The community leader, Miss Charlotte Green, who had previously provided her with unshakable support during a hurriedly planned, Rebecca gave every detail, memo, and letter during their meeting in a quiet cafe. Every bit of information that exposed the real reason for her dismissal caused Mrs. Green's eyes to widen with a mixture of shock and resolve. She replied, her voice steely yet, "This isn't just about you, Rebecca. In order to restore the core of our community's healthcare system, we must reveal this injustice and make sure that, since kindness isn't punished, as they planned, the discussion shifted to the wider ramifications of the public disclosure of Riverdale Medical Center's systematic suppression of innovative life-saving methods in favor of financial gain and formalities. It might spark a significant change in the way that healthcare was controlled in the area. Rebecca's termination, which had previously been a personal sorrow, was now developing. Turn become a light of hope and a rallying cry for everyone who thought that compassion was the cornerstone of genuine healing during that crucial period when the cafe was gently tapped by raindrops. While the stray puppy was peacefully sleeping in Rebecca's lap, she decided to stop letting her used against her or people who shared her views in the past, but instead she decided to take the lead in a movement to redefine what it meant to care and reclaim the repressed legacy of kindness and change not just her life, but the lives of innumerable others following. After Rebecca made the startling discovery about Project Compassion, the environment around her started to change. Shocking realization that her acts of kindness were not isolated errors, but were a part of a repressed legacy evoked strong feelings in Rebecca, as well as in those. The secret file with its icy messages and emotional testimony was all around her, led many to reevaluate their personal principles at Riverdale Medical Center and question the hospital's leadership narrative. Some employees who had been familiar with the hospital's strict policies had already started to hear rumors of the scandal. In the break room, the leadership voiced cautious interest in learning the truth surrounding Rebecca's termination. A seasoned nurse named Maria confided in a small number of her co-workers, and the chats took on the tone of a conspiracy. "I've always thought that our hospital valued statistics over people. Perhaps Rebecca's dismissal wasn't only regarding one stray puppy. The goal was to silence anyone who ventured to show concern for others above and beyond the call of duty." But the news sparked an agonizing mix of vindication and shame, according to Dr. Alan Pierce. When he found out about the withheld file, Rebecca's close friend and former mentor was clearly shaken. Although he had always appreciated Rebecca's compassion, he had also helped to enforce the hospital's stringent. In a heartbreaking private discussion, he acknowledged, "I've seen so many brilliant doctors put aside for doing what's right. I never thought that a sincere act of goodwill would result in such a severe punishment." In the meantime, community leader and compassionate care advocate Miss Charlotte Green realized that Rebecca's discovery meeting with her colleagues in her small but busy workplace had wider ramifications. She called an urgent strategy discussion and said, "This file is a bombshell. By placing copies of the documents on the table, it is demonstrated that the system is not only malfunctioning, but is actively stifling empathy. We need to mobilize support for change using this evidence." A team made up of concerned residents, local activists, and animal welfare advocates listened carefully as she laid out a strategy to reveal the hospital's covert operations. Their goal was obvious: to guarantee that the public would discover the truth and call for reform. In a surprising turn of events, the response from the hospitals. At a small neighborhood gathering, the patients and their families were equally moving. Prompted by rumors of the scandal, an unplanned meeting was held in the hospital lobby where patients disclosed personal accounts of one elderly patient's carelessness and lack of interest. With shaking hands, Thompson recounted, "How I used to feel invisible here, like if my suffering didn't exist, but after hearing that, the fact that medical professionals like Rebecca have battled for all lives, including those of stray animals, gives me faith that I am appreciated and seen." Her moving statement struck a chord with many in attendance, fortifying the determination of those who think that healthcare should be centered on compassion. When information about the file's contents started to circulate outside consequently, the news was covered by the media with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. The persistent reporter Olivia Reed, who had previously advocated for Rebecca, set up a number of interviews. In one such interview, a nurse was among the staff members who were eager to speak up. Emotionally described how I've seen coworkers repress their compassion for years out of fear of. Now that Rebecca's bravery has been made public, I believe we have an opportunity to. The public's response to reclaiming our humanity was swift and divided, while some local, as board members and company owners defended the hospital's stringent standards, an increasing number of voices called for. In the midst of all of this, Rebecca herself was going through a significant change. After being devastated by treachery and the pain of losing her career, she now found comfort in the unexpected assistance from old coworkers and community members. Every encouraging word and sympathetic remark from, in quiet moments, individuals who supported her mission helped heal the scars from her dismissal. Late at night, while holding the stray puppy, whom she now lovingly calls Hope, Rebecca would think about the files. They can attempt to eradicate sympathy after having revelations and choose to remain firm. Whisper to Hope, but even in the hospital administration, the truth will eventually come to light. The once impenetrable facade of authority started to show cracks, and some mid-level managers who had previously been afraid to speak up began challenging the justification for the severe disciplinary actions they took, and they had separate meetings in staff lounges talking about the potential to review hospital policies, and even subtly advocating for internal reforms. But the top levels of government stayed steadfast for the time being. In the days that followed, the initial shock of Rebecca's dismissal and the revelation of a more measured collective response replaced Project Compassion. Once a bastion of strict conformity, the hospital was starting to change as both employees and patients struggled with the effects of repressed empathy and the community's need for accountability, which was spearheaded by Olivia Reed's reporting, such as M. Green, was always expanding. Louder in this tumultuous time of transition, each person's responses, whether they be silent resignation or fierce, a tapestry of human experience was created by each person's rage or hopeful determination. Each little act of disobedience against the status quo and each discourse helped to gradually change the suppressed legacy of compassion was a real, breathing movement rather than a sinister secret stashed away in dusty archives. The characters surrounding Rebecca started to change their lives in response to her heartbreaking but resolute need for attention. Excitement for the upcoming chapter of this developing story, which was supposed to reveal the truth as well as create a new course for the future in which compassion was the cornerstone of healing rather than a liability. About Rebecca's startling discovery started to settle into a mixture of cautious hope and brewing dissatisfaction. Difficulties and secret subplots started to surface, adding further layers of intricacy to an already tumultuous circumstances in the days after the long-suppressed file of Project Compassion was made public. Beyond the boundaries of Riverdale Medical Center, rumors circulated about Dr. Samuel, a former patient, someone who had previously silently backed the innovative pilot program, Ortiz, contacted Rebecca in a. He confided Rebecca in a private talk during a late-night phone call. I've been following this from a distance, and you should be aware that there were other outstanding doctors, in their own way, who were subtly ignored for comparable deeds of kindness. And I think your tale is just one aspect of a much more extensive story. Dr. Ortiz's revelation suggested a secret network of caregivers who had their careers destroyed because they dared to challenge the system's called deficit. This subplot presented a fresh difficulty by revealing the complete scope of the structural injustice that had compelled kind-hearted people to decide between loyalty to, in the meantime, etiquette and the humanitarian sensibilities that formerly characterized their calling. Younger nurses were emboldened by the simmering antagonism that developed among the ranks in the hospital's corridors. As public support for Rebecca's activities grew, they started to arrange unofficial meetings with the goal of talking about how, in these covert meetings, they could progressively advance internal reforms without endangering patient care. In the dimly lighted hospital hallways, or even in the calm areas of the break room, they discussed if the current. We've seen what happens when a punishing system is changed to one that rewards empathy just as much as efficiency. Occurs when compassion is disciplined, a nurse said, her voice shaking with fear and resolve. But if we band together, perhaps we can reverse it while also improving the communities. Another subplot was established in response to the scandal, and Olivia Reed, the tenacious reporter whose work had become the voice of truth for many, started to get anonymous tips that suggested. One tipper claims that money intended for Riverdale Medical Center's administration's financial problems. Patient treatment was being transferred into hidden accounts, so assisting a government that stifled creative activities such as Project Compassion, which, if accurate, could not only damage the hospital's standing, but potentially start legal disputes that might rock the healthcare industry as a whole. Network in the area, the increasing media pressure, and the expanding network of opposing voices within the facility prompted the hospital board to make a crucial decision in a private meeting where board members discussed whether to hire outside consultants to look into the financial disparities or to start an internal audit. The idea of revealing more scandal was unsettling for many, but for others it was the sole route to genuine responsibility, and the internal conflict within the board added yet another level of complication when groups emerged focused on maintaining the hospital's reputation rather than conducting a thorough analysis of its procedures. Rebecca's personal pursuit of justice became increasingly intertwined with more extensive institutional transformation inside this changing circumstances. Mrs. Charlotte Green became more and more weighed down by the duty of overseeing a growing community movement in addition to the Loss and Animal Care Project, urging healthcare reform during one of her strategy sessions, which were held in a small local activists at the community center, former hospital staff, and even some. Our purpose has grown beyond simply rescuing stray lives, and worried patients came together to talk about their future actions. M. Green fervently stated that the goal now is to restore dignity to healthcare, regarding ensuring that deeds of goodwill are not penalized but rather honored. The gathering emphasized the global interconnectedness. Rebecca's personal struggle was now a microcosm of a greater struggle against a institution that had long prioritized impersonal procedures over the human spirit. Rebecca had to deal with the emotional upheaval of her own rejection as these subplots intertwined, but also the complex network of issues that could overwhelm the hospital's legacy. An anonymous email reached her, email that was signed solely with the initials O, and asked her to meet at A. The email suggested even more pervasive corruption in a covert location next to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Secret ledger that might disclose the entire scope of financial misconduct connected to the repression of compassionate care. Torn between her desire for clarification and her anxiety about more disruption, Rebecca struggled with the choice. The stray puppy, now lovingly called Hope, curled up. With each of these new problems, the hidden network stands next to her, as though providing quiet support during her moment of uncertainty. Of sideline physicians, internal disputes among nurses, rumors of financial malfeasance that are whispered, and Rebecca's mission became more urgent and dangerous when an anonymous tip urged her to conduct a more thorough inquiry. Were increasing, and each action she took carried the potential of additional loss on both a personal and professional level. Ability to revolutionize the delivery of healthcare in her community during this time of increased tension as several storylines started to come together. Rebecca understood that her battle was no longer about performing a single act of kindness or helping a single stray animal. It was about recovering a compassionate legacy that had been methodically stifled for far too long, and about making certain that every act of compassion, no matter how tiny, was acknowledged as the foundation for recovery during the weeks. The emotional undercurrents of Rebecca's journey started after the tragic occurrences at Riverdale Medical Center, to come to the surface in unfiltered and surprising ways at every quiet moment and conversation. Each intense conversation exposed the intense, frequently contradictory feelings of individuals, captured in the whirlwind of transformation late one soggy night, soon after Rebecca had revealed to Miss Charlotte Green the shocking revelations of Project Compassion. She discovered herself in a little dimly at cafe meeting with a number of friendly staff members and old co-workers. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken suffering, and Hope. Dr. Alan Pierce is still struggling with his past guilt. He added softly, "I've seen so many of us breaking the silence with complicity. Rebecca, your experience reminds me of the times when we were compelled to suppress compassionate, smart doctors. His voice veered between remorse and appreciation, demonstrating his sincere belief in healing outside of the parameters of protocol. Across the table, a young man revealed the internal struggle that had plagued him for years. Jenna, a nurse, paused before speaking, her eyes full with both resolve and doubt. I've always questioned whether the strict regulations we adhere to truly deprive us of our. Seeing humanity put everything on the line for that stray puppy made me wonder about everything. Yet now that all these Project Compassion revelations have left me conflicted, I want to advocate for change, but I fear the repercussions for patients who depend on us to maintain order. Her short but moving confession struck a chord with many others in the room, causing a surge of silent agreements and glances in a distinct but similarly tense discussion. Mrs. Charlotte Green met with Olivia Reed in private too. Talk about the fine line that must be drawn between exposing systemic wrongdoing and protecting the caregiver's dignity. Charlotte's voice was firm and gentle in the little back room of a community center, and Olivia took every bit of. The information we uncover pierces not only the hospital's management, but also the hearts of people who have endured in quiet. Therefore, we need to be cautious that our search for the truth doesn't turn into a weapon that obliterates the very. We want to bring Olivia back to life with compassion, since her eyes showed a strong dedication. Justice nodded slowly and said, I understand the risk, but occasionally we owe it to these caregivers and their patients to demonstrate that the deepest traumas must be revealed before they can heal. That empathy is a strength rather than a weakness in the face of hospital stress. A group of mid-level managers was gathering in the calm inner corridor near the nursing station. Managers convened for a spontaneous conversation, with one manager, Mr. Richardson, expressed his worry with a pinched brow. We've always taken pride in upholding order, but today, the very notion of empathy is being examined. If we permit these acts of kindness to be freely acknowledged, where do? When we draw the line, I'm concerned about how it will affect patient care and operational effectiveness for his coworkers. Argued uneasily, divided between adherence to institutional policy and despite these internal struggles, Rebecca herself demonstrates the indisputable human need for kindness. Got engulfed in a whirlpool of introspection and determination one peaceful evening following a demanding day of gatherings and neighborhood activities. She sat by herself on a park bench with a stray puppy, who is now lovingly called Hope. As she looked, the cold autumn breeze at her feet conveyed the faint sounds of voices in the distance. She found herself struggling with a question that has plagued her since that terrible day as she looked into Hope's dependable eyes. Is my unfailing compassion a gift or a burden? Am I too idealistic in the morning? She was able to face these uncertainties in the park's peaceful alone after recalling the cruel remarks made by Dr. Caldwell and the heartbreaking shock of her termination, but also the community's overwhelming support and the sincere admissions from those who thought that change was possible. I have to have faith that doing what is right, even if it hurts, will. Eventually, she assured herself in a quiet voice while caressing Hope's silky fur that she would illuminate the path for others. During a contentious town hall meeting hosted by Ms. Green last week, feelings reached. A heated argument sprang up between a group of traditionalists who maintained that the only way to guarantee constant patient care and a passionate group of younger employees that support systemic change rose is torn between sadness and rage. Despite the noise, Rebecca stood up and spoke calmly but resolutely, defending their vision for the future of healthcare. Claimed that empathy upsets the order and that compassion is a weakness. But whenever I look into Hope's eyes, I keep in mind that healing is about human connection, not just efficiency, and that our laws shouldn't penalize it. Her remarks were filled with personal anecdotes, and they ought to honor us for our compassion. There was a noticeable change in the atmosphere as anguish and unshakable resolve temporarily muted it. Communal mood in the post-meeting private discussions that kept exposing the intense emotional problems that each person encountered. Dr. Pai, who had previously recognized empathy as a potential obstacle to clinical detachment, started to doubt his own convictions. Maybe we He whispered to a close colleague. You need to reconsider what it means to truly care. For many nurses, the challenge was extremely personal and professional, and every fresh deed of kindness now carried the burden of potential vengeance, but also the hope that their sincere concern may lead to change as the ripple effects of these intricate relationships developed. It became evident that the path to a more humane system was rife with difficult decisions and compromises. But in the complex web of feelings, there was also an increasing sense of solidarity and the conviction that they might pave the way for excellence and empathy to coexist. So, in the middle of the characters' individual and collective struggles led them to take cautious movements ahead, each motivated by the faith that as the days went by, the power of truth and compassion might eventually heal the deepest wounds. Explosive disclosures, intense conflicts, and a feeling of impending Riverdale Medical Center and the community saw a wave of progress. Yet beneath the optimistic top, suddenly, disturbing new clues of deeper intrigue started to surface, adding still another level of suspense to Rebecca's. The journey began when Rebecca got an anonymous call in the silence of a cloudy morning. The caller's voice was garbled hours before dawn, but the message was unmistakable. At Riverdale, it appears that some people will do whatever it takes to conceal the enigmatic truth. It made her shiver since it was the first sign that strong forces, possibly even more ingrained than the people who had fired her, worked at a company that was committed to crush any opposition to the status quo. At the same time, rumors circulated among hospital employees of enigmatic individuals spotted nearby. Security footage examined in restricted areas of the building after hours. In the dim light of the break room, hushed groups noticed a shadowy figure purposefully coming close to the archives. In storage spaces where Project Compassion suppressed files were stored, some people theorized that some were concerned that the financial problems alluded to in anonymous communications might be linked to the intruder, that the individual was present to recover or maybe destroy evidence that might reveal further corruption in the meantime. In an unexpected turn of events that added to the mystery, Olivia Ree got a tip from a source who claimed to be. She received a scanned document with the header "Confidential" from an insider in the hospital administration. Investigative journalists only saw the paper, which described a number of mysterious transactions and questionable. The tip also included expenses indicating that money intended for patient care had been transferred into hidden accounts, that these anomalies could be connected to a covert network that uses any means necessary to preserve the status quo. Essential Olivia's heart pounded when she recognized that the corruption was far more pervasive than anyone had thought. The goal of the tip was to safeguard a complex financial network, not merely to silence gestures of kindness. Constructed on exploitation and secrecy simultaneously, a minor but noticeable change happened among the middle administration of the hospital. Some courageous managers who had previously been silent and complicit started to converse in whispers and stealthily in the corridors. One such manager, Mr. Harrow of Ads, was observed departing. An envelope in a private Dropbox account close to the nurse's station, which is only accessible by a small group of reliable people, but rumors circulated that it contained incriminating material connecting a number of high-ranking. Tension among the employees increased when officials suppressed Project Compassion, and some started to question if this internal decline might lead to a full-scale internal disclosure, since the community's response to the new features was as heated at a nearby cafe where activists and a lot of people got together to talk about the scandal, and there were a lot of heated arguments. One activist, Maria, fervently, if we permit these secrets to remain undiscovered, the corruption that has been choking our healthcare system will not stop, so we must demand answers, even if doing so makes us uneasy. Her remarks struck a chord with a group of teenage volunteers who had already volunteered at Riverdale Medical Center's very foundation, started planning a social media campaign to expose the truth hashtags. Truth for Compassion and Expose the Silence began to gain popularity locally, increasing the pressure on the hospital administration and attracting the attention of local news sources. Rebecca was tugged in several different directions by this rising storm, and she was struggling on one hand. with the consequences of her dismissal, both personally and professionally, while on the other side, she was being pushed by the unidentified. Alerts and new information to launch a more thorough inquiry into the hospital's covert operations late one. At night, while she was making her way home with hope in her arm, she came across an enigmatic person standing beneath a flashing streetlight. The individual with the cloak covering their face gave her a. The guy whispered, "This is for you, small, unmarked flash drive. It contains information that has the potential to alter everything. But proceed with caution because there is no going back once the truth is revealed." Rebecca could inquire about anything. The apparition vanished into the shadows, leaving her both ecstatic and afraid at the consequences of this fresh lead. As the general tension increased, as these suspicions of collusion and corruption mounted, the hospital's hallways, which had previously simply echoed with the sounds of everyday care, now seemed to vibrate with a fever pitch. Concealed information and wary looks, the potential that someone was consciously trying to repress even more. There was a sense of fear and expectation in every discussion as a result of the incriminating evidence. With each shadow seen on security film and anonymous correspondence, a recurring question emerged: how far the powerful would go to safeguard their interests, and more significantly, was Rebecca prepared to confront a system that was willing to suppress empathy at any cost? With Rebecca's stakes higher than ever, hope nested by her side as a continual reminder of the life she had spared was hardened by resolve. More than ever, the lives that still needed to be saved appeared to gaze up at her with mute resolve, saw that discovering the true scope of this plot was a battle for the soul of, not just a personal crusade. Her neighborhood, as the inquiry progressed, and Rebecca's pursuit of the truth was fueled by the mysterious flash drive. Character relationships and other subplots started to unexpectedly converge within the intense Riverdale Medical Center's hallways, and the larger community saw the formation of new partnerships and the renewal of old ones, reconsidered in light of a controversy that threatens to alter the definition of compassionate care itself. In the Olivia Reed, the tireless journalist, grew in the days after the anonymous tip. Through a series of private conversations, she started to unearth financial anomalies at the hospital that went beyond its financial focus. The accounts of more medical professionals who suffered under the hospital's strict, profit-driven policies, according to a former resident's conversation with Dr. Samuel Ortiz, that a number of gifted doctors had been discreetly fired for comparable displays of compassion. Ortiz spoke with a blend of remorse and perseverance. "I wasn't the only one who suffered because I cared too much. There's a vast network of." His statement struck a profound chord with kind-hearted souls who have been silenced by the system. Olivia encouraged her to start a special series about the lost healers, initiative that would further highlight the toll that repressing compassion takes on people back at Riverdale. The effects of the staff members in the hospital cafeteria were also personally affected by the scandal. Whispered discussions swirled, amid conjecture over the enigmatic flash drive and the person who delivered it wearing a hood. Mr. Harrove and Rebecca, a mid-level manager, were having a private discussion. "I've witnessed things here with a young nurse named Jenna that I never would have imagined." Whispered, "There's more to this hospital than the well-maintained facade they present to the public. We need to connect. Discover who has been manipulating Jenna, whose admiration for Rebecca has only been stronger over time." Nodded enthusiastically. "Perhaps if we unite, we can advocate for change from the..." She muttered inside, implying that there was an emerging clandestine alliance among people who thought empathy was an A. In the meantime, Miss Charlotte Green was diligently working on her, arranging a number of gatherings with local activists, former hospital staff, and even some. Among the kind board members at one of these events was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly patient who had long felt. She described being ignored by the system and sharing her personal tale, saying, "I've been treated like just another number." Eyes watering. But after learning about Dr. Lawson's bravery I'm hopeful that our views will be heard at last, because it's possible that the hospital is concealing these facts. The group was inspired by moving testimonies, which helped to bridge the gap between the community's problems and the hospital's internal conflicts. A private meeting between Rebecca and Dr. Allen was set up in response to the mounting need for responsibility in another development. The mentor, Pierce, had already expressed sincere guilt for his part in upholding the strict rules of the hospital over coffee at a peaceful area of a nearby diner, and Dr. Pierce acknowledged that I wanted to help, but I didn't believe in the system until I witnessed what happened to you, which made me face my own flaws. In addition to being a former coworker, Rebecca has discovered that compassion is not quantifiable. The groundwork for Doctor was laid by their discourse, which was filled with regret and a common resolve for redemption. Pierce to discreetly push for internal change among his peers, and his backing turned into a vital connection between the old guard with the fresh generation of caring reformers when the several hospital groups started to modest network links that offered a more cohesive stance against mid-level managers who had long felt constrained by the top-down strategy began to covertly challenge the deeply ingrained bureaucracy, distributing data from the internal Dropbox that connects financial anomalies to choices that had adversely affected patient care. These disclosures not only highlighted the systemic wrongdoing at the institution, but also gave Olivia Reed's impending expose more legitimacy, which was, amid this rush of activity, they are ready to cast a bigger net across the entire healthcare network in the area. Rebecca noticed that she was pulled more and more to these networks, where anonymous sent her encouraging words, emails from sources that provide support and assurances of additional evidence that could lower the obstacles to one such communication, which was signed simply OOO, reaffirmed the necessity of compassionate care, of revealing the truth, and alluded to a secret ledger that recorded unauthorized financial transactions. But the message left her with more questions than answers, but it also strengthened her determination to follow up on every lead, since she knew that through these exchanges, she was able to blur the boundaries between personal and political life, bringing her closer to a larger revolution. Vendettas and a cry for structural change started to conflate the disparate voices. A repentant mentor, a resolute journalist, passionate activists, and brave frontline staff began to create a complex web of opposition to a system that had long placed efficiency over compassion and, despite all, the stray puppy, who had unintentionally come to represent this entire movement, acted as a living reminder that even the tiniest deed of kindness has the capacity to change lives by starting a domino effect. The possibility of a united movement for humane reform started to take shape as these subplots came together, that not only aimed to uncover corruption, but also to reconstruct a healthcare system in which all human life, or animal, was respected, and the relationships made during these tumultuous times would soon prove to serve as the foundation of a revolution, laying the groundwork for Rebecca's incredible journey's subsequent phase as the numerous factions within Riverdale reached a fever pitch due to the storm of revelations and increasing pressure. Medical Center and the neighborhood were on the verge of an irrevocable turning point when diverse voices, ranging from angry employees to passionate community organizers, started to come together to form a force that posed a danger to the hospital's long-standing system. During a hurried internal discussion in a private conference room at the hospital on a cool evening, Dr. Rebecca Lawson and a few empathetic coworkers convened to examine the most recent evidence. The air was tense and filled with unsaid terror. Halfway through the meeting, a dispute broke out between two groups, one headed by Orthodox supervisors who defended the hospital's strict regulations, while a group of younger physicians and nurses called for widespread reform. Mr. Harrove, a senior administrator, smashed his fist against the table and yelled, "Decades of operational discipline cannot be compromised by personal feelings if we let them get in the way." His remarks were greeted with a shout of disapproval. Every act of compassion will cause chaos, and our patients will suffer. From individuals who had personally observed the human cost of neglect, Lawson's, even though it was measured, her own voice had an unquestionable edge as she noted that our responsibility is not only to keep the peace, but also to, if our system is so inflexible that it penalizes kindness, then people do care. Then, Outside the conference room, we are failing our own objective. Rumors of the internal strife had reached the Olivia Reed's most recent expose had already caught the attention of the hospital board and local media, depicted financial mismanagement and the board's repression of creative, compassionate care in a damaging manner. Called an urgent conference, divided between the need to protect the hospital's reputation and the undeniable, intense discussions about whether to start a full-scale external investigation in response to the growing scandals. The board's inability to reach a consensus on whether to conduct an audit or to discreetly manage the issue internally only served to widen the divide between them. In the midst of this mayhem, the hospital's frontline staff and leadership get an important call. Arrive from a neighborhood to a town hall meeting that Miss Charlotte Green had planned, and the mood was buzzing with excitement as hundreds of activists, patients, and locals gathered in a sizable community center, their expressions displaying a mix of hope, rage, and resolve. Ms. Green declared as she stepped onto the podium that an investigation of the hospital's operations was about to begin, and we would no longer tolerate the sacrifices made by our healthcare system. As she said, "Compassion for profit," the audience erupted in applause, raising their voices, reflecting a general call for change. But the internal conflict was still being played out at the hospital, impacted. Late that evening, as the board discussed their next course of action, a secret break-in was discovered in the hospitals. A hooded person was silhouetted by security cameras in the dim emergency lighting of guarded archives. Among the sealed records, illumination moves precisely and calculatingly, causing panic. Spread among people who were aware that the hidden Project Compassion files in these archives included data that may reveal the truth about Dr. Lawson's termination and the hospitals. Martinez, a financial irregularities officer who had been keeping a careful eye on the situation, quickly organized a response squad. "We must secure those records right now." She gave her tone, steely, a firm instruction. Staff workers gathered in small groups throughout the hospital hallways, their discussions tinged with anxiety and defiance. A young nurse who was shaking but unwavering told a colleague our history and our aspirations for a brighter future would be lost if these files are destroyed. Her hushed words perfectly captured the intense personal stakes that each person had realized were involved in this conflict at the same time. When Rebecca's phone rang, she got an urgent text from an unidentified number telling her to meet with a trusted. When she arrived at a nearby parking lot, she ran into an old mentor. With a mixture of grief and resolve in his eyes, Dr. Samuel Ortiz replied, "Quiet, Rebecca. Quietly, what's happening here is about a whole network of caring people, not just one lost job. Silencing caregivers requires immediate action to prevent further evidence from being permanently deleted." His remarks struck a deep chord with her, strengthening her determination to fight for everyone's vindication, not just her own. A physician, nurse, and patient who had been disenfranchised by a system that didn't care. As dawn became closer, the various conflict lines came together to form a single pivotal event that affected the board, the media, and the internal. The community's demand for transparency and the dissidents both pushed for a definitive. With the help of her co-workers and the urgent care center, Action Dr. Lawson, with the evidence of repressed compassion in hand, she was prepared to make the community's pleas, challenge the hospital's management, make the truth known, and recover the history of care that had been so cruelly ignored at that crucial juncture when the hospital skyline was illuminated by the first rays of the day. Every heartbeat, whether at Riverdale Medical Center or in the neighborhood, people are anticipating a monumental shift. The stage was now prepared for a climax that would redefine internal disputes, which had reached a crucial turning point. Not just Dr. Lawson's professional background, but also the institution's core. Pressure peaked when the community at large and the forces at Riverdale Medical Center came together on a single pivotal event, given the growing evidence of financial wrongdoing and repressed compassion now exploded across local headlines, signaling the end of the window for stealthy maneuvering. There were imminent clashes that would compel all parties involved to drive, including administrators, frontline employees, and late one stormy evening, community advocates will rise up in a converted. A crucial meeting was held in a conference room located deep within the hospital, and the doctor, Rebecca Lawson with a group of understanding coworkers and representatives from the recently established internal. A group of grim-faced hospital board members sat opposite from the reform group, and the air was charged with tension from senior bureaucrats. And Miss Lise Carmichael was still in shock. "We stand at a crossroads," she said, attempting to marshal the board's disjointed resolve following recent changes. Stable but tense, we have two options. Either keep on in this direction of sadness and secrecy, or embrace a future where we make decisions based on compassion and openness. After a heated argument, one board member then smashed his fist on the board with an angry tone. "If we permit unchecked conduct by your so-called reformers, the whole stability of our institution is at danger of individual judgment. We run the risk of causing chaos in patient care, and operational effectiveness must continue to be our first concern." His remarks echoed across the room, igniting dissident mutterings from several members of the crowd. Dr. Eisen rose his eyes out. Light with tenacity, "We and our patients are more than just numbers." She fervently tallied the proof, which shows blatant displays of kindness, even if unexpectedly save lives. By saving the stray puppy, I wasn't ignoring my responsibilities. I was exemplifying the therapeutic spirit that this hospital previously promoted. If we keep punishing, in addition to betraying our own principles, empathy puts us at risk of losing the community's confidence, which is the topic of discussion. Change the dynamics of the meeting and brought in Mr. Harrove, a mid-level manager. Known for his unyielding defense of long-standing principles, he discreetly acknowledged, "I have personally witnessed how our procedures can impede creativity and empathy. Fear that our institution's heart would be permanently broken if we ignore this situation." Even though he admitted it gently expressed, indicated a developing group on the board that was prepared to oppose the current situation, both inside and outside the dramatic town hall meeting hosted by community advocate matched the emotional turmoil in the conference room. Miss A.G., in front of a crowded auditorium full of patients, local activists, and concerned people, Miss R. Charlotte Green. Green mounted the platform and declared, "Today we demand that we no longer tolerate a system that punishes kindness. Accountability from all those involved, not just those who dismissed Dr. Lawson for acting morally." Her passionate speech was greeted with a roar from an organization that has permitted compassion to be sacrificed for business, of support from the audience, whose enthusiasm emphasized the public's enduring wish for reform at the hospital. Crucial evidence connecting high-ranking authorities was discovered during Officer Martinez's investigation into the break-ins. Due to the incriminating records presently on the table, the board was compelled to suppress Project Compassion. Face a difficult reality. In addition to silencing progressive care, their actions had also directly led to created a corrupt culture that put patients and underprivileged employees in jeopardy. Because to the increasing pressure of the board started to divide some members due to internal dissension and outside scrutiny, argued for a prompt, open audit of hospital procedures, while others, during this time, many who were loyal to their old allegiances opposed any severe steps. During internal conflict, Dr. Lawson's phone rang urgently. It was from Dr. Samuel Ortiz, a close ally, begged her to accompany him for a last meeting with a handful of rebellious administrators prepared to split up in a private, quiet conference room far from. In front of onlookers, Dr. Ortiz and his team presented their bold proposition. The creation strategy is to eliminate the current hierarchical structure and implement a new care paradigm that put compassion, openness, and community involvement first. We need to take action right away. In his voice, Dr. Ortiz stated that if we do not take advantage of this chance, we will keep functioning under a government that prioritizes efficiency over humanity. As the evening wore on, the board's decision heated up and resulted in a contentious vote. Most reform-minded members pushed for an external audit, which was done behind closed doors. Despite hesitancy, the final vote on Project Compassion involved the public release of all relevant data. Intense discussion marked a sea change, a visible and symbolic departure from Dr. Lawson, Mrs. Carmichael, and leaves the boardroom in secret after passing mead. The newly empowered reformers entered the main lobby of the hospital, where a few staff members and patients were present. Having assembled, anxiously awaiting news, Miss Carmichael, with measured assurance, spoke to the audience, acknowledging our past errors and taking prompt action after hearing your opinions, pledging to conduct a thorough external audit of our procedures and to put improvements in place that would bring transparency back, and have faith that compassion will serve as our compass rather than a liability. In that pivotal moment, the announcement sent shivers of relief and cautious hope through the hospital. Time when the disagreements and choices made that evening came together to form a group pledge to rebuild a promise. Because with empathy, even the strictest laws might be changed. Dr. Lawson felt a renewed sense of purpose as he gazed out at the faces of people who had supported her despite her misery. Rejection and the hardships she had faced were now being replaced with the prospect of a new chapter in which the bureaucratic apathy would no longer bury a history of caring. Nestled nearby, the stray puppy, which had come to represent her undying devotion, gave her faith that this was simply the start of a life-changing journey that would alter not just her life, but Riverdale as a whole. Medical Center as the atmosphere changed from dusk to a cold, starless night. Tension around Riverdale Medical Center peaked at an almost intolerable level. Every muttered discussion, every covert look in dimly lit hallways, and each concerned heartbeat in the community made hints about the imminence of the final act of this developing drama. Everyone was now aware of the evidence of institutional injustice, repressed compassion, and corruption, that nothing would ever be the same again in the hospital. In a private conference room, the atmosphere was electrifying. Dr. Rebecca, its windows are hidden by thick curtains to block away the outer world. Lawson and her group of reform-minded coworkers gathered around piles of papers and digital files from recent recordings of strange late-night activities around the archives, together with the enigmatic flash drive. Every piece of evidence was indisputable, and they all echoed like a ticking clock leading up to Rebecca's pivotal moment. Her hands trembled a little as she read a damaging memo from years ago, order stating that any departure from the rigorous protocol, including extra careful actions like hers, will be addressed with serious repercussions. That memo, which was previously concealed in the maze of hospital bureaucracy, represented all that had gone wrong with the organization, and each word strengthened her resolve. Across the hall, a succession of loud knocks abruptly broke the oppressive stillness officer's scars from her unfair discharge. With faces furrowed with urgency, Martinez and her investigative team stormed into the room. "We've secured more." She made the announcement in a forceful but disbelieving voice, and the security camera footage revealed a hooded someone who has been identified as the enigmatic insider is making another attempt to interfere with Project Compassion files. The revelation rocked the group, and it became evident that not only was there a deliberate attempt to conceal the reality, but that strong forces were still making a concerted effort to prevent any farther descent outside. In the hospital's dimly lighted atrium, local activists, staff, and patients had gathered for their collective. With every minute that went by, the murmuring became louder as the board held its breath in anticipation of its impending decision. Noise of the crowd's voices rose in silence, and the mingling of hope, fear, and resolution in the chilly night air. Together, we demand responsibility and openness in the boardroom. The reform faction, encouraged by growing evidence, was in the final vote. While the fervent requests of frontline employees and the community had pushed for fundamental reform, full external review of the hospital's procedures, and the publication of all project-related documents, compassion was evident in the opposite faction's fervent adherence to tradition and profit-driven metrics. Aware that change is inevitable, the room was tense, with each vote sending reverberations through the institution's future. The board's decision was ultimately declared as the clock approached midnight in a voice that, with a sense of resignation and renewed resolve, Miss Lise Carmichael took the stage to speak to the group. Representatives from the staff and media are waiting outside. Following extensive discussion, decided to carry out a comprehensive external audit of all hospital procedures, which would include a detailed examination of the. She stated that in order to guarantee completeness, we would also be making all pertinent Project Compassion files publicly available. accountability, and openness. As we begin the process of reestablishing the statement was greeted by a flurry of cheers, tears, and applause from people whose trust had been betrayed. The response of the assembled crowd reaffirmed the idea that compassion was the core of genuine love and not a sign of weakness. Healing in that instant, the stifling burden of secrecy started to disappear and was replaced with, in the silence of the now empty meeting room, by the bright promise of a fresh start. For a few period, Rebecca stood by herself, staring at the tiny picture of the stray puppy that she was carrying inside of her. The trip had been turbulent, filled with both systemic and personal tragedy, betrayal. But when the window's first rays of a fresh dawn appeared, she sensed "This is our moment," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and resolve. "We have stood tonight for all the lies that have been disregarded, and tomorrow we create a future in which kindness is rewarded rather than punished in that crucial moment for every Riverdale soul. Every patient, caregiver, and community member at the medical center who appear to hold their breath as the stage was prepared for a historic shift and a reckoning with the past and a fearless foray into a future characterized by compassion, honesty, and unflinching truth as the promise of a better future filled the corridors. Internal and external disputes came together to form a single, indisputable truth had changed, and with it came the optimism that no action of goodwill would never again be muffled by bureaucracy or apathy. As the night grew darker, every components of Riverdale Medical Center and the surrounding neighborhood appeared to come together in one thrilling moment for Dr. Rebecca Lewin leads the final battle after months of hardship, treachery, and, finally, with steadfast resolve, the long-suppressed files were available. The overwhelming voices of caring caregivers and incriminating proof of financial wrongdoing had all resulted in. This final encounter was a turning point that would impact not just her career, but the entire. Sitting at the hospital auditorium, the air was heavy with excitement and intense feelings. Gathered the faces of community members, previous patients, and staff, lighted by the flare of expectation in their eyes on stage and the gentle glimmer of emergency lights. With Miss Charlotte Green, Officer Martinez by her side, and a group of administrators who were committed to reform, Rebecca was ready to tell the truth that had been suppressed for too long. Rebecca took a deep breath before speaking. For too long, the crowd has penalized acts of kindness, and our unwavering commitment to healing has been. I come before you tonight, shackled by strict procedures and profit-driven regulations, not as a discredited physician, but as a spokesperson for all caregivers whose compassion was considered a liability. Her voice, despite being steady, she shuddered under the weight of her voyage. Now is our chance to recover what was rightfully taken from us. To be concerned about innovating and prioritizing humanity over numbers as a sign of agreement reverberated across the audience, and the suspense increased when Olivia Reed, the fearless investigative reporter, stood at the platform, holding a digital camera and a pile of recently collected documents. She started outlining the scandal in stark detail while the slideshow played behind her. Olivia revealed that these materials reveal a willful repression of Riverdale's humanitarian behaviors. In addition to financial issues, Medical Center reveals a concerted attempt to quiet those who dare to put human care ahead of the expected memoranda and ledger entries. Such internal correspondence resulted in audience gasps and a deep stillness. Officer Martinez came forward at that precise moment with an important piece of information that will help our investigation into the archival breaches have revealed unquestionable evidence that senior authorities deliberately attempted to erase documents that would have supported her compassionate actions. She stated the tension heightened in the room as everyone came to understand that the corruption was more pervasive than anyone had initially thought. In a final act of once an anonymous threat was revealed, the cloaked man defied the doctor. Out of the shadows came Samuel Ortiz, a former mentor and silent advocate of the pilot program's compassion. His face, worn by years of remorse and determination, revealed the tale of a man who had given up his job to defend. He stated, "I have witnessed the harm done by burying truth under bureaucracy, the very ideals that had once inspired him. Speaking in an emotionally charged voice, I stand here today to attest that stifling empathy is not only unfair, but also The confrontation reached its peak when we were betrayed in our mission as healers. The hospital board finally admitted their wrongdoing after intense public criticism and growing evidence. Once the strict enforcer of antiquated regulations, Louise Carmichael, came forward. With a sorrowful heart and a voice that veered between desperation and resolve. Speaking to the assembled community and the employees in the room we permitted, she admitted, "We have failed you. Fear of change to overcome the actual meaning of our calling. As of right now, we will start a comprehensive external audit and make all documents pertaining to the suppression of compassionate care available to the public. We'll also create a new oversight group whose goal is to make sure that compassion and openness become the announcement, which is a cornerstone of our organization, was greeted by an incredible wave of relief, and tears streamed down faces as jubilant applause echoed through the hall like a declaration of hope. Audiences' sobs of validation, grief over historical injustices, and hope For Rebecca, the moment was both cathartic and hopeful for a better future. She gripped the little picture of hope as she looked out at the sea of resolute faces, feeling bittersweet. Not only is this my win, but the stray puppy whose quiet presence has come to represent the strength of compassion. Said, "It is the victory of everyone who has ever been punished for caring too," her voice ringing with clarity. It is the assurance that no good deed will ever again be shrouded in secrecy during that pivotal moment. The collective bravery of a community united broke the heavy weight of bureaucracy and censorship. Through empathy, the hospital's troubled past was exposed, and a wave of change, a pledge that the legacy of kindness would now be inscribed in strong, indisputable letters as the day came to an end and the first rays of morning broke through the darkness. Every soul in the room sensed the spark of a revolution in which truthfulness, compassion, and the determination to put others' needs ahead of one's own would permanently alter the landscape of healthcare. And as Rebecca exited the stage, her gaze locked with her coworkers' patients and supporters, each of whom is evidence of the tenacity and enduring strength of compassion in the kind brightness of a new day. The echoes of that night of transformation continued to reverberate throughout Riverdale's corridors, medical center, and in the community's hearts. It provided heartbreaking support during the storm of revelations. At last, conflicts and courageous defiance had given place to a cautious optimism and reinvigorated. This started out as a gesture of pure compassion for Dr. Rebecca Lawson. The act of saving a stray puppy on a chilly autumn morning had turned into a spark of transformation that affected every area of As the hospital gradually came out of its dark period, there were already noticeable indications of reform. Clear that the external audit, which is now under progress, guaranteed openness and responsibility, and the newly established oversight committee was charged with making sure that the compassionate would never be suppressed again, according to Louise Carmichael and her associates. Formerly viewed as strict enforcers of a strict system, had shown genuine regret and pledged to restore trust. That their open acknowledgement of their previous errors signaled the start of a recovery that would ultimately. Rebecca's effort to restore the hospital's integrity was quite personal. Her spirit had once been in danger of being crushed by the hurt of being fired for a deed of charity, but in the wake of the stunning revelations and the tremendous outpouring of public support, she was re-energized by a feeling of, every time she glanced at Hope, the stray puppy who had come to represent her in a silent way, she felt a sense of purpose. Rebecca accepted the idea that even the tiniest act of compassion might lead to monumental change every day. Her new position as a pioneer for compassionate treatment rather than a fired physician. She started working on projects with local animal shelters, community leaders, and even former coworkers that honored and rewarded compassion and medical treatment at community gatherings in nearby facilities and even within the freshly renovated patient lounges of the hospital are used by both staff and residents, gathered to tell their tales of hope, healing, and grief for senior citizens. They found comfort in knowing that their voices mattered after becoming disillusioned with a system that had made them feel invisible. "I have witnessed the shift in interpersonal relationships," said Mrs. Thompson, a lifelong patient, her eyes gleaming with appreciation. "I feel like a human being with a story, not just a number, today." The media, which had previously been a constant source of criticism, had unexpectedly joined Olivia Reed's. In addition to revealing Riverdale Medical Center's sinister side, the landmark series on the Lost Healers, but has prompted other establishments to reconsider their procedures. Her paper, filled with in-depth interviews and strong evidence-generated discussions around the actual cost of putting financial gain before of people, while local media outlets commended the hospital's audacious reform movement. The public's trust started to be restored brick by brick through, in the corridors of Riverdale Medical Center, open communication and mutual dedication. Mid-level managers and frontline employees, who had previously been split by bureaucracy and fear, were quietly undergoing a revolution. Together with renewed energy, unofficial compassion circles were formed. Small teams of physicians, nurses, and administrators that got together frequently to discuss their struggles and successes. These groups not only promoted camaraderie, but also acted as breeding grounds for creative suggestions for incorporating empathy into routine medical care for several fire. The change was truly amazing and demonstrated the lasting value of interpersonal relationships on a clear. Dr. Lawson gave her colleagues a sincere speech in the morning as sunlight streamed through freshly cleaned windows. Address. She announced that we are at the start of a new chapter today, where we respect every act of kindness, where we are transparent, and where our goal is to heal rather than just the heart and soul of each individual we serve, in addition to their body, she said, struck a profound chord, inspiring a shared resolve to transform healthcare's future before closing. Encourage you to become a part of this movement of responsibility and compassion if Rebecca's journey has motivated you to. If you think that every act of compassion has the power to bring about change, then follow us on YouTube for more tales that honor bravery, resiliency, and the transformational potential of kindness. Show your friends this video and family, and share your stories of compassion, changing lives in the comment section. Together, we can create a thank you for being a member of our community and look forward to a time when no act of kindness is ever concealed in the shadows. For the next chapter of our narrative, one that is full of love, hope, and the indisputable, the resilience of the human spirit.